Good evening, everybody. I'm Maggie Vespa. Welcome to The Story. We, per usual, have a ton to get to tonight, including why these two held a joint press conference today. Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley and hotel heiress Paris Hilton. Odd pair? Yeah. Serious subject? Absolutely. We'll explain later. And I'm sure you'll have a lot to say, so email thestory@kgw.com. Find us on social media, and remember, your questions and your comments drive this show. And with that, let's get to the big story. Tonight's topic revolves around the COVID-19 pandemic and a once kind of ubiquitous phrase that we actually haven't heard in a while. And you know what? Let's take a second and refresh your memory.
Herd immunity.
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 Okay, so there's that phrase again, herd immunity. It's back in the conversation because basically experts are telling us that Oregon could reach herd immunity in 2 months.
Yep.
Yeah, so Ashley Korsland talked about this at 4 and 5. We want to go more in depth. So let's just start with reminding people, because it's been a while, what herd immunity even means.
Yeah, so let's just talk specific to start with the Delta variant here, because that's what we're dealing with. That's the dominant strain impacting people here in Oregon. So 85%, Maggie, is the magic number. So essentially, experts say 85% of the population either needs to be vaccinated or develop natural immunity by getting a COVID infection. And so at that point, when we reach that 85%, it's really hard for the virus to keep spreading because there aren't that many people left for it to infect. That's the theory. So I talked with OHSU data scientist Dr. Peter Graven, and he says Oregon could reach that 85% threshold by December 26th.
December 26th. I mean, so basically Christmas.
Right, exactly.
Okay. So you probably remember at home, we saw how overwhelmed our ICUs have been, including at OHSU. Our team did a special inside that ICU. So does this news about herd immunity coming mean that relief is coming for those hospitals too?
I think that's kind of a tough question to answer with a specific answer.
Okay.
I would tend to say yes and no, and here's why. So obviously, it's good news that overall the cases in Oregon have been dropping since early September or around there. So that's good news. And even though the strain on hospitals will start to ease a bit as we go into the next few weeks and months, Dr. Graven says we have more grim days ahead, many more grim days ahead. He says more than a fifth of people in the state are still vulnerable to infection.
You know, it's still going to mean before we get to this 85% level that we're going to have 177,000 more people get infected in Oregon, 50,000 of which will show up with potentially a positive case result. We know that there's going to be deaths that result from those. You know, I would estimate probably around 700 deaths, in fact. And so, you know, that to me is not really a relief. That's going to be more people that are going to have to go through this.
Okay, so that is really sobering to hear that a lot of people could still have hard times ahead. Yeah. You were telling me earlier, like again, you reported on the herd immunity expectation at 4 and 5, but we wanted to talk about this on this show because you were telling me that in addition, kind of more in depth, experts are saying there could be another wave of challenges headed toward hospitals. So even when these COVID numbers start to drop, more challenges are coming.
Yeah, exactly. So we already know that hospitals are dealing with a pretty catastrophic nurses shortage that's been going on before the pandemic. Right. Exacerbated now by nurses leaving the industry. But then you have the vaccine mandates where people have lost their jobs in the healthcare system for refusing the vaccine. On top of all of that, though, this is what I thought was really interesting that Dr. Graven talked to me about was the fact that so many people have put off critical services, critical care, think screenings, doctor's appointments, things like that throughout the pandemic, that he anticipates that our hospitals, while they might be able to come up for air a little bit when it comes to COVID, a surge in the hospitals, they're going to be dealing with all these people who have put off preventative care and might end up in the hospital. So he thinks it could be pretty taxing on the system, on the healthcare system for quite a while. And again, I just want to point out these are his predictions, right? These are projections. So we'll have to just kind of see what happens in the next few weeks and months ahead.
Yeah, you hope it's not as dire as they're saying it could be.
Exactly.
But they're watching, and we are too. Yeah. Ashley, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's talk about housing now. And last night's big story double dipped into our mission to focus on solutions. So let's highlight that too. In short, that massive affordable housing bond that Metro voters approved in 2018 is producing some big fat results. 7 Affordable housing complexes are going up across the metro area. Hundreds of units are coming online and thousands more are coming down the pipeline. And people like Airlis Daisy Mejia, a single mom who has grappled with homelessness in the past, they're moving into these units.
It was so amazing. I couldn't still believe it. And even now, I still get a call and I'm like, what did I do? How am I getting kicked out? Because it has been so long that I haven't had my own place. So it's amazing to have our own place.
So that whole story is online at KGW right now. Here's the thing, though. We have more solutions to tell you about tonight because, again, there was that housing bond in 2018, but there was also a massive Metro Supportive Services tax in 2020. Remember that one, too? That also passed. It was a tax on the wealthiest residents, expected to produce more than $2 billion in 10 years to go toward things like addiction and mental health services, job training, and so on. Services basically that help people on the streets find stability. And Metro's council president had an update on that tax as well.
So we're focused on helping people permanently get out of homelessness through a supportive housing program. That program was approved by voters in May of 2020 and launched less than 4 months ago and has already helped dozens of people find permanent supportive housing. By the end of the year, we hope to help 2,500 people find permanent housing. And there's more work to be done, but there's no magic wand to wave. We need to come together to celebrate the dozens of little victories like this, because those are going to slowly but steadily move the needle to addressing this crisis.
So we are waiting on exact data about the success of that tax so far. It's actually due out next month, and we will, of course, keep you posted. Hey, we also got this DM on Twitter from Annette. She wrote, Oregon announced a $1.9 billion kicker. Why can't they invest the extra money toward the homeless crisis or early intervention, Head Start education that desperately needs more funding? Great question. Love our viewers. So in short, on the offset at least, they can't do that because they're bound by law. Oregon's kicker law says if the state collects 2% more in taxes than it expects to during its 2-year budget cycle, then the taxpayers get that extra money back. And that's what's happening this year. If lawmakers wanted to spend the money on something else, they could do that. They would have to vote on it. And we know Oregon politics are super smooth and never come to a grinding halt. That being said, they have talked about it. In 2019, Governor Brown floated the idea of using kicker money to help fix the state's struggling PERS fund. Other leaders have talked about giving it to schools or saving it for just a rainy day fund. But those proposals have never gone anywhere. So for now, you can probably expect to get some extra money back in your tax return. Okay. Changing gears, I want to talk about something really important now, and that is what Paris Hilton was doing today. And I am not joking. She was actually doing something really critical. Paris Hilton was on Capitol Hill, and she was joined by Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley and other lawmakers, along with survivors of abuse. That group came together to push for a bill that would protect children placed in what are called congregate care facilities. Those are group homes, basically for kids. They're all over the country, and sometimes kids who are deemed troubled are sent there for treatment. Paris Hilton was sent to one of those facilities as a teenager, and she says what she went through was horrific.
One night when I was 16 years old, I woke up to 2 large men entering my bedroom, asking me if I wanted to go the easy way or the hard way. Thinking I was being kidnapped, I screamed for my parents. And as I was being physically dragged out of my house, I saw them crying in the hallway. They didn't come to my rescue that night. This was my introduction to the troubled teen industry. I was strangled, slapped across the face, watched in the shower by male staff, called vulgar names, forced to take medication without a diagnosis, not given a proper education, thrown into solitary confinement in a room covered in scratch marks and smeared in blood, and so much more.
So, in the past few years, Hilton has made it her mission to try and protect kids who have gone through the things she went through and to stop it from happening to more kids. So she's working with Senator Merkley and other lawmakers on what's called the Accountability for Congregate Care Act. It would basically establish basic rights for kids who are sent to these kinds of facilities.
Congregate care without oversight becomes congregate abuse. And that's what we discover all too often when we look into the system.
Now, it is worth noting Paris Hilton supported a similar bill in Oregon that took effect last month, actually. And this new nationwide bill is based in part on that Oregon law.
It's opening night for the Blazers, but I'm not qualified to tell you about sports, and frankly, Orlando's busy.
It's going to be electric.
So let's talk wine instead. CJ's wine, that is. Also, this week's Hey Help campaign is going strong, but we think it's time you learn more about POIC.
And it's so important that we support our young people, because our young people will be the next leaders of our community.
When the story continues.
Hey guys, welcome back. So keep sending in your questions and your comments to thestory@kgw.com or reach out to us on social media. We are always checking your messages during the show. And also, I want to remind you about the Hey Help campaign. This week, we are asking you to consider donating to Portland Opportunities Industrialization Center and Rosemary Anderson High School, also known as POIC and RAHS. They provide workforce training and career placement for communities of color, as well as violence reduction programs. To donate, hold up your phone's camera to that QR code or go to kgw.com/heyhelp. And if you want to learn more, here we go. I spoke with their president earlier this week about their push to expand mental health services, especially for families impacted by violence.
Our mental health approach that we take is influenced by the African American culture. There are some things that the African American culture has experienced, and there are rituals, there are values that are specific to the African American experience, particularly here in Portland, Oregon, that are critical when you think about developing services specifically for a population. There are certain barriers that specific communities face, and it's been well documented that African Americans have had a tough go over the years. And what we try to do is try to normalize getting help. And so getting folks confident to take those next steps to address those mental health issues and those traumas that are impacting their lives on a daily basis is critical.
Okay, so again, here's that QR code. And this, like all of our drives, is a micro donation drive. So feel free to give any amount, no matter how small. And by the way, if you have an idea for our Hey Help campaign, let us know by emailing thestory@kgw.com. Okay, I'm going to try to do this. Let's shift gears. It is opening day for the Portland Trail Blazers. And if you know anything about this show, you know we don't know nearly enough about the basketball to do Orlando's job. So instead of doing sports, let's talk Vice News. So star guard CJ McCollum will probably do great basketball things on the basketball court during the basketball game tonight, but his wine is also getting a lot of buzz. But I'm Chang. Sorry. Yahoo Finance this week gave CJ a shout out for diving into the industry, one which hasn't historically been accessible to people of color. In fact, last month we reported CJ and his wife bought a 318-acre vineyard in Yamhill County. This after launching the McCollum Heritage 91 brand last year. And CJ McCollum told Yahoo Finance, "I want to ensure wine is more approachable for everyone, particularly those who may not see people who look like them leading the profession." CJ, cheers. That's awesome. And good luck tonight. All right, getting a little more, to use a non-word, sportsy. Damian Lillard once again putting rumors to rest that he wants to leave the Portland Trail Blazers. Here's part of what he said to reporters yesterday.
I like our staff. I like Chauncey a lot. And I love being a Trailblazer. You know what I mean? I love living in Portland, and I love what I built, you know what I'm saying? And like I said on media day, I want to see it through.
Has Orlando ever said sportsy? I don't think so. So Dame went on to say he wants to be the league MVP. He wants to take the Blazers to an NBA championship, all the things. So last time that happened, by the way, that championship, that was 1977. So tonight we are sending Dame, CJ, the whole squad, some good vibes by diving into the KGW Vault for a look at that historic Blazers win.
And George McGinnis' shooting slump came to an end in this game, but he couldn't make the one shot Philadelphia so desperately needed. The Blazers ran out the clock and won their first NBA championship in their young 7-year existence. Coach Jack Ramsey finished his first year with the Blazers with an NBA title, and he justifiably had nothing but praise for his players.
This is the finest team that I've ever coached. These are the finest people that I've ever coached, and it's been a real pleasure. If we had not won this, I would have felt the same way. But having won it, this has been my goal since I started coaching professionally, to win the NBA championship, and I'm really happy today.
And so were tens of thousands of Portland area residents. Blazer Mania struck town with fans literally dancing in the streets. The downtown area was jammed for hours, and Portland celebrated its first Major League sports title. And the celebration will no doubt continue through the night.
Very nice. If you have any ideas for the KGW Vault, let us know. Email the story at kgw.com. Meantime, coming up, we're going to talk more about vaccines, specifically vaccine exemptions, when the story continues. Also, what's the windiest place you can think of in Oregon? Well, if you said the coast, the feds agree with you, which is why they think it'll be a good idea to put wind farms just offshore. So now that the deadlines for the vaccine mandates in both Oregon and Washington have passed, there is a good chunk of people out of their jobs right now, but there are even more people still on the job, even though they have not and likely will not get the vaccine. And they get to stay because they were granted a religious exemption to the vaccine mandate. But we should note there is a pretty sharp difference between Oregon and Washington in the number of people who got those requests approved. With that, let's bring in Tim Gordon to talk about this. So, Tim, if we are comparing the two states, Oregon and Washington, how many exemptions were approved?
All right, well, Maggie, let's start with Washington. The numbers there are really pretty low. Washington approved religious exemption requests for just 6.8% of state workers, and even fewer of those people will actually get to stay on the job. Only a little over 1,800 people got accommodations granted. That's just over 3% of workers. Meantime, in Oregon, nearly twice as many, 11% of state workers got religious exemptions. And get this, in Oregon, they're allowing everyone who got a religious exemption to stay at work with accommodations. So everybody there gets to go ahead and stay on the job, Maggie.
Okay, interesting. So you also found out that that's all because the way these requests were processed is actually different between the states.
Right, at least that's in part the reason for the difference. In Washington, the state's centralized human resources division up at the state level is actually processing all the religious and medical requests. But in Oregon, every agency gets to make the decisions themselves with guidance from the state.
Okay, so then do we know what kind of standards a person has to meet to get a religious exemption?
Yeah, Maggie, it's pretty broad, really. Oregon sent us their human resources guidance, and all the requests are done on a case-by-case basis, but an employee does have to cover some ground and do some things, and we can tell you what those are. One is to confirm that they have a religious belief that prevents them from receiving a COVID-19 vaccination. Also, they have to describe that belief and how it affects their ability to receive a COVID-19 vaccination. The descriptions have been pretty specific. People can't just say that they don't believe. The government should tell them what to do, but they should describe specific religious experience they've had or specific instructions like a Bible verse. Officials are allowed to question that religious belief, and they're allowed to follow up, but it's limited. They can ask whether someone has received vaccines in the past and how the religious belief is different from, for instance, a political or a personal preference. Employers can consider whether the person's behavior isn't consistent with the tenets of their religion, but they have to take into account that a person's beliefs can change over time. So a lot to consider there, certainly, Maggie.
Yeah, definitely. It's pretty in-depth. Interesting stuff. Tim Gordon, thank you. Let's talk about the climate crisis now. This sounds counterintuitive, but there is a national push for wind farms on the ocean, more specifically off Oregon's coast, off the coast. Here's Keely Chalmers.
Drive through the gorge, you'll see them, those massive wind turbines generating renewable energy and offering an alternative to fossil fuel. Well, pretty soon you'll likely start seeing them off Oregon's coast as well. The Biden administration wants to develop up to 7 offshore wind farms on both east and west coasts. Its goal, to generate enough offshore wind energy to power more than 10 million homes by 2030. And Oregon is an ideal spot. Not only do we have the wind,
we have the terrestrial electrical infrastructure to support it. So if we are going to do it on the West Coast, Oregon seems like a very appropriate place for us to move forward.
That's Bryson Robertson, co-director of the Pacific Marine Energy Center and an associate professor at Oregon State University. He sent us these photos of what the turbines might look like.
Offshore wind energy on the West Coast will have floating versions of the terrestrial wind turbines that we see in Eastern Oregon. However, they are going to be far offshore.
Robertson says a wind farm offshore would have huge benefits. Not only would it provide clean energy and jobs, it would also bring in a lot of money.
If we can produce, let's say, green electrons in Oregon, we can export those to California, Washington, and charge a price premium for that. So economically, it makes a lot of sense.
The problem, studies have shown those huge turbine blades you see on land kill hundreds of thousands of birds every year.
A lot of potential impacts and a lot of unknowns.
That's where Lisa Balance comes in. The director of OSU's Marine Mammal Institute just received $2 million to study the impacts of offshore wind farms.
There are a lot of other types of potential impacts associated with noise production, especially in the marine environment where sound travels farther and faster in the water than it does in the air.
She'll look at all the potential sites to determine which ones are better than others so that the wind industry can make informed decisions on where to build. Keely Chalmers, KGW News.
So fascinating. Okay, guys, keep sending in your questions and your comments to thestory@kgw.com and find us on social media. We're going to finish the show right after this. We got time for one more viewer question tonight. We picked this one. Hey, Maggie, wondering if you guys can look into finding out at what point mask mandates will be lifted. What metric or hospitalization rates are required before things can relax? Good question there to David, because Oregon is actually one of just 7 states right now with an indoor mask mandate still in place. We've also got an outdoor mask mandate, by the way, for kind of public crowded settings. As you heard earlier in the show, health experts think we could reach herd immunity for the Delta variant by the end of the year. So all of that in mind, we reached out to a few different agencies and we got the clearest answer from Multnomah County. They wrote, quote, "The state mandate is formally in place until February 2022. While the Delta surge is slowly receding, public health expects to lift COVID restrictions cautiously. We envision slow and steady progress over the next several months rather than the frequent changes in approach that we experienced in 2020. They went on to say, all this being said, the virus will ultimately determine the timeline. Don't we know that's true by this point? So there are no hard and fast metrics that we're trying to hit, like the number of people in the hospitals or the percentage vaccinated. Our leaders are basically being pretty cautious while we're still in this surge, even though cases are going down. We'll, of course, keep you posted if we hear anything different. All right, it's that time. Pick up your phone, follow us on Twitter at The Story at KGW, or email thestory@kgw.com. And now it's that time. Let's check in with Laurel Porter now. Laurel, how you doing?
Good. Thank you, Maggie. Tonight we're talking about staffing shortages at our schools and one district's attempt to get more candidates. The news at 6:30 starts now.
This is KGW News.